Hello, dear friends. Welcome to our Sunday weekly gathering on our study of the Spirit's teachings. The Spirit teachings is what you're finding in the Gospel according to Spiritism. What is it? Well, almost every chapter in the Gospel according to Spiritism by Allan Kardec is structured in a way that we find a quote from the Gospels, and then Allan Kardec helps us understand those. And then after that, very often, mostly, we find the Spirit's teachings. And the Spirit's teachings is information that comes from spirits on high, further elucidating the messages of the chapter. And today we're finding ourselves in chapter 17. And chapter 17 is entitled Be Perfect. Wow. Don't we all want to be perfect? It's a high stake. So let us see how we can understand this desire of ours to become more perfect. And in this case, it's almost like a demand, be perfect. Well, Allan Kardec starts off the chapter by saying that it's not really possible, or what is the words that this translation is using? It is not admissible that the creature is as perfect as the creator. Now we know our creator is God. So it's not admissible that we are as perfect as God. So now we're already breathing a sigh of relief, because that's a very high stake to be like God. But we also know that we're working towards God. So now, how can we understand this maxim, be perfect? And Allan Kardec says that it is a relative perfection that we're striving for. And this relative perfection gets us closer to the divinity. And that is really our goal. And how does that look like? Well, number one, we are invited to love our enemies. So to love our enemies. Number two, to do good to those who hate us. So we're seeing Allan Kardec is not picking the easier hurdles. He's pulling out the high ones for us. And he says to pray for those who persecute us. So these are three very challenging maxims which we are invited to practice to be more perfect. In essence, he says, perfection is charity in its broader definition. So now that we have established what Allan Kardec said in this chapter, let us now fast forward to the Spirit's teachings. Hi, Tony. Thank you so much for joining. Thank you. It's so nice to have you here. So let us share the screen so we can help our mind a little bit. Here we go. And we do a slideshow from the start. So here we go, the Spirit's teachings of the Gospel according to Spiritism, chapter 17, items 7 through 11. So the first chapter, under the headline, the Spirit's teachings, is entitled Duty. And it's item 7 by the Spirit Lazar. So what does Lazar say about perfectionism? He says, duty. So he makes duty the centerpiece of his explanation. He says duty is an individual's moral obligation towards him or herself and towards others immediately thereafter. So this is really important. So let us listen to that. So duty is the individual's moral obligation, first towards ourselves and secondly towards our brothers and sisters. And this is really moral duty, because then he says, I want to speak here only about moral duty, not the type imposed by the professions. So when we hear the word duty in this context, we're invited to not think about our jobs that will most likely start tomorrow morning again and those professional duties. No, we're looking at moral duties, right? So there are two obligations towards ourselves and others. Then he says, in the order of sentiments, duty is very difficult to fulfill. Why is that? Because it is contrary to the seductions of self-interest and the heart. So we know that our passions are still running quite wild here on planet Earth. And so it's hard for us to be dutiful and to always fulfill our moral obligations towards ourselves and our brothers and sisters in particular may be very challenging. But nevertheless, we're invited to focus on it tonight so that hopefully we can integrate that a little bit more into our daily practice. And then he says, people's inner duty is left to what? Our free will. Of course, our free will determines all of our thoughts, all of our words, sentiments, our actions. So duty is also left to our free will. Our will is always in charge. Then he says, the sting of conscience that warns and upholds us, but it is held back often powerless before the sophistry of passion. We're very sophisticated with our passions. So that's where often our duty falters. When faithfully obeyed, the duty of the heart uplifts people. But how is such a duty determined? Let us see. How is such a duty, and he's speaking about moral duty, determined? And here he goes. He asks further, where does it begin? Where does our moral duty begin? And where does our moral duty end? And here is the answer. He says, duty begins precisely at the point in which you threaten your neighbor's happiness or peace of mind. So, first and foremost, and that ties into number 2 on top of this slide, that our moral obligation is towards others. And he says, it begins precisely at the point where we cause our brothers and sisters headaches, when we impinge on their happiness, and when we create lack of peace of mind, when we ruffle their feathers. Our duty is not to do that. And where does our moral duty end? It ends at the limit you would not want to see surpassed regarding yourselves. Aha. So on the one hand, we're not supposed to upset our brothers and sisters. And on the other hand, our moral duty ends where we would not want to be upset with. So in other words, it's a form of the golden rule. It's a form of the golden rule. So if we apply that, we have a pretty good measure of how to fulfill the twofoldness of our moral duty. Then he continues, duty is the practical summary of all moral speculation. So all the moral maxims, all the maxims that for us to uphold, to become more perfect, which is the overall chapter we're dealing with today, is duty is the practical summary of. So this is how important duty is. And then he continues, it is the courage of the soul. So duty is the courage of the soul who confronts the distress of life's struggles. It is both strict and yielding. It's both strict and yielding, ready to adapt itself to diverse complications. Duty remains unbending before temptations, and that is probably exactly our weak spot. All those many temptations we harbor in our souls. So it remains unbending before temptation. Persons who fulfill their duty love God more than they love other individuals. And they love others more than they love themselves. Wow. They are at the same time judge and slave in their own cause. So let us say that again. Persons who fulfill their duty, and we're talking about moral duty, love God more than they love other individuals. Love God above all else, and our neighbors, ourselves. And they love others more than they love themselves. That's where it becomes particularly challenging, right, friends? They are at the same time judge and slave in their own cause. and we add to fulfill our duties or duty. Then he wraps up by saying, duty is the most beautiful laurel of reason because it provides the soul with the strength it needs for its development. Duty provides the soul with the strength it needs for its development. Duty grows and radiates under a moral elevated form at each of the higher stages of humanity. Individuals' moral obligation towards God never ceases. And we're morally obligated most and foremost to God, but then comes ourself and our brothers and sisters. And as we heard from Allan Kardec, to become more perfect, to strive for perfection, means that we're loving our brothers and sisters, in particular, treating those who cause us difficulties particularly well. That's charity. So that was Lazare, dear friends. Item 7. Now let us move over to item 8. It's entitled Virtue. Makes sense, right? We're working on becoming more perfect. First of all, we looked at duty and the importance of moral duty, fulfilling our moral duty. And now we're looking at virtue. Now we already know that duty is a very beautiful virtue. But now let us see what François Nicolas Madeleine is telling us about virtue. In its highest expression, virtue encompasses all the essential qualities that comprise the good person. So if we're virtuous, we comprise all the virtues. To be good, charitable, hardworking, reasonable, and modest are the qualities of a virtuous individual. So what does it mean to be virtuous? Here's our help. And thanks to Spiritism, we are being spoon-fed how to conduct ourselves. It's really, Spiritism makes it very easy for us. So to be embodying the qualities of a virtuous person means that we're charitable, that we're hardworking, that we're reasonable, and modest. And that is fulfilling our moral duties as well. He says, those who parade their virtues are not virtuous, since they lack the principal quality, which is modesty, and display the vice most contrary to it, which is, what is the vice most contrary to modesty? Yes, you said it. Pride, of course. What is at the root cause of all evil on planet Earth? Selfishness and pride. Here we go. All the arrows point towards the biggest problem we have on planet Earth, or let's put it a little bit more positively, the biggest challenge we have on planet Earth: selfishness and pride. And so for modesty, of course, pride is the antidote. A virtue truly worthy of its name does not like to show itself off. One might divine it, but it hides itself in obscurity, and it flees from the admiration of the masses. So humility is very important, very important. We do the good because we work for God. Just recently, we looked at the chapter and studied that we can't work both for God and mammon, right? So here we have it in a different form. Now he gives us the example of St. Vincent de Paul. We're not going to go into that, but you're welcome to read what he says about St. Vincent de Paul. Now, guessing from his title, Saint, we can guess that he was not prideful and selfish. So then he says, in principle, individuals who exalt themselves, who erect a statue to their own virtue, annul by this very act any real merit they might have. So if we extol our virtues, if we go on social media, write emails, or we go on I don't know what else, YouTube whatever all those channels are, and we're telling the world what a good person we are and all the good things we've done today. Maybe not, right, friends? But we know better. So then he says, virtue is a grace that I desire for all sincere spiritists. Virtue is a grace. But I will say to them, better to have less virtue with modesty than more virtue with pride. Yes. For it is through pride that successive humanities have been lost. And it is through humility that they will someday be redeemed. What beautiful, wise words. And we most likely know how it feels in our own lives, and we observe it on our beloved planet, even today, or maybe particularly today. So better to have less virtue with modesty than more with pride, for it is through pride that successive humanities have been lost. It is through humility that they will someday be redeemed. So now we understood duty better, what it means to fulfill our moral duties. Now we're understanding humility better, which is a moral duty, to become more humble. And now we're moving on, and we're going to understand the relationship between superiors and subordinates better. Now we're going to go to the different edition of the gospel. We're moving over to this one because the translation is just a little bit easier to follow. So this is also by François Nicolas Madeleine, same person, same spirit. And he says, now this is pretty long, but again, we're not going to read everything because it will be too overwhelming, and you're invited to read it later. Or maybe you've read it already. So he says, authority, like wealth. So both having a position of authority as well as being wealthy is delegated. It's a delegated situation in life. People who receive it will eventually have to give an account of what they did with it. Of course, we know it's been delegated by God. He says, Providence grants positions of authority either as a trial or as a mission. So we either have positions of authority and or wealth, but here we're talking about authority in particular as a trial or a mission. Interesting, right? So to be the president of the United States could be a trial. Yep, it could be a trial. We don't know. And it may be revoked and may revoke the charge when circumstances. So Providence grants positions of authority either as a trial or mission, and may revoke the charge when circumstances warrant. So when the situation is right, God grants and God takes away. And we know that we are invited to roll with the punches. As Job said, that we are supposed to be happy when we receive, but also not shed a tear when God takes from us. That's the ultimate test, isn't it? So people who are entrusted with authority should never forget that they have souls in their charge and will have to answer for the good and bad guidance they give. We have to render an accounting. Let us always remember that with actually everything that we have received. May it be the position of a superior, may it be the position of a subordinate, money or no money, children or no children, whatever job we have, it's all granted by God. And at the end, we need to render an accounting. All right, where does it continue? The mistakes. I forget they have the souls, and then it will have to answer. Yeah, the mistakes the subordinates make, the vices they surrender to because of the poor guidance they have received, will carry consequences for the people in positions of authority. In the same way, the reward for leading their subordinates on an upright path will also come back to those in authority. So he's essentially just elaborating on the thought, on the moral teaching that we will have to render an accounting. Recall that every person on earth has a mission, some greater than others, but whatever form it takes, it's always designed to further love in the world. So all of our missions, no matter how small or no matter how big, is with us in order to further love on planet Earth. And if we don't go into that direction, this is the guidepost that we're being gifted with right now. So we know how to carry what we have, how to make the most of what was given to us. It's to expand love on planet Earth. Are we doing that? Are we doing it because maybe we clean toilets every day? Do we do it to expand love on planet Earth? We are the head of a company or the manager of a group of employees. Do we fulfill that sacred duty to expand love on planet Earth? That is our question. One of the questions for us tonight. You thus fail in your mission when you betray this providential design. Yes, we just received a golden spoon, a beautiful guideline of how to conduct ourselves, of how to become more perfect, because that is the chapter we are finding ourselves in. Then he continues, leaders who keep Christ's words don't look down on those below them because they know that social distinctions don't exist before God. Social distinction means nothing before God. Let us remember that too. And as we are ascending towards God, that is our goal as well, to keep that in our hearts and minds. So that we don't think, oh, I have this position, or oh, I have this, that, or the other, or I'm so smart and all of that. Doesn't mean anything. It's our moral development that's the most important one. And with that comes what? Humility, fulfilling our moral duties, to be charitable, bottom line. Then he says, if superiors have duties to perform, subordinates also have duties that are no less important. And this is really important. Both superiors and subordinates have duties to fulfill. Everyone does. And all of them are equally sacred. That's really a great equalizer, isn't it? Subordinates and superiors alike are guided by their sense of duty, which is enhanced by their faith and the knowledge that every deviation from the straight and narrow path will create a debt that must be repaid sooner or later. So to say that again, both subordinates and superiors alike are guided by their sense of duty. Remember, we just finished the chapter on moral duty. It's ingrained in our subconscious, in our souls. All we need to do is listen. So we are guided by our sense of duty, which is enhanced by our faith and the knowledge that every deviation from the straight and narrow path will create what? It will create a debt that must be repaid sooner or later. Because at the end of the day, we need to give an accounting to God. So that is helpful for all of us who are working in particular. But the same is true for parents and children, and maybe for caregivers with the elderly, because sometimes as caregivers we think we're superior because they may have dementia or any other issue that may slow them down. But now we know humility is the answer, right, friends? All right, let us move on. Now we're going to the individual in the world. That's item 10. Going back to the other version. So this was written by a protector spirit. So the individual in the world, a sentiment of compassion must always animate the hearts of those who gather under the Lord's sight to implore the assistance of good spirits. Now, in order to become more perfect, we are reminded of being compassionate. So this is also very important. Therefore, purify your heart. Do not let any mundane or futile thought linger in it. So let us purify ourselves. And how can we purify ourselves? Many different ways. We can read, we can attend seminars, we can listen to beautiful music, walks in nature, taking care of animals, very much so, gardening, so many different forms for us to purify our hearts so that we can open up our hearts and feel more compassion. Then he continues. Do not think that we wish to advise you to live a mystic life that keeps you outside the laws of the society in which you have been condemned to live. What a positive word, right? I'm sure the other translation would be a little more positive, but I don't think we're condemned to live here. Maybe we are, but we could see that we co-created this, of course, right? We co-created our existence here. But the key is, so we're invited to be more compassionate and to not live the life of a mystic and keeping ourselves outside of the laws of the society. We are invited to live with the men and women of our time in the way that men and women should live. So this is really beautiful because many religions, they really stress that we should not be partaking in life so much. The virtue is to take ourselves away from everyday life and to live on the mountain or in a cave or in a monastery. We know already from the Spirit's book and the answer that the Spirits on High has given us that actually a life of that nature, which just consists maybe of meditation and prayer, is the life of a selfish person. And here now, this protective spirit underlines for us again to live in society, to not take us apart, hold us apart. Be cheerful and happy, he also says, but of the cheerfulness provided by a clear conscience and the happiness of the heirs of heaven, counting the days that will draw them nearer to their inheritance. Our inheritance is what? It's not the money in the account. It's the inheritance, the effect of the causes we have created in our lives. So it's really the effect, it's the consequences that we will be living based on our thoughts and feelings, the choices we've made. So let us be happy. Let us live in society. Let us be cheerful and happy. Virtue does not consist in assuming a stern and gloomy face. So we're not more virtuous like the nuns in the Catholic monastery. A lot of us were raised in school by the nuns. They were quite stern, right? I personally actually wasn't raised that way, but I have lots of friends who have reported back to me. But that's not a way to be more perfect, right? We're not more virtuous because we're stern and gloomy. So because we're invited to be cheerful and happy. It is sufficient when one begins or finishes a deed to lift one's thought, and this is important. So all of this, what we just said, but how can we stay connected? So now we're invited to be cheerful and happy. We are becoming more and more compassionate. We live in society. We're not stern and not gloomy. But how do we stay connected to God? How can we still make this fulfill our everyday duties, both in the material sense as well as the moral sense, with a prayerful attitude? And here he helps us now. The protective spirit says, it is sufficient when one begins or finishes a deed to lift one's thought to that Creator and to ask Him, in an impulse of the soul, to grant His watch care for carrying it out and to grant His blessing for finishing it. In all that you do, look to the source of all things. Do not do anything without the thought of God, purifying and sanctifying your acts. Emmanuel, in the book Thought and Life, shows us an expanded view of prayer. And this is exactly actually what this protector spirit also shares with us again. And that is, we live our lives, but we are connected. The mirror of our soul is turned and connected towards God continuously. Because Emmanuel says that any focus on a task that we undertake is a form of prayer. And if we connect ourselves consciously with God, with the good spirits while we do it, by being compassionate, by being happy and cheerful, and so much more, then we live a prayerful existence. It's beautiful, and it's just that simple. As Christ said, perfection is found entirely in the practice of absolute charity. So this is really the wrap up of all of it. Once again, perfection is found entirely in the practice of absolute charity. And everything we've said so far is part of charity. But the duties of charity extend to all social positions, from the lowest to the highest. Those who live in isolation would have no charity to practice. Be happy in accordance with the needs of humankind. But may your happiness never hold a thought or commit an action that might offend God, or anything that might cloud the face of those who love and guide you. Sounds like a beautiful prayer, doesn't it? Be happy in accordance with the needs of humankind. But may your happiness never hold a thought or commit an action that might offend God, or anything that might cloud the face of those who love and guide you. That is the perfect way to become more perfect. God is love, and he blesses all those who love virtuously. Beautiful, isn't it? God is love, and he blesses all those who love virtuously. So now we're understanding how to be an individual in the world, and it means we're connected to our brothers and sisters. We live the life that our culture offers to us. However, we do it virtuously, with everything we do to expand love, to be charitable, to be happy, to be cheerful, and blessing everything in our lives, starting from our thoughts. All right, now we're moving on to the last item, and this is entitled Caring for the Body and Spirit. So now we're going to learn of how to be more perfect in the sense of care for body and spirit. Now, this message is by George, and George is a protective spirit. Does moral perfection consist in the mortification of the body? Now, this is a question that is important because we may not be like yogis and yoginis of mortifying our body or sitting in positions for years and at no end, having disassociated limbs and the likes. But we may do it in much more subtle ways where we don't pay attention to our body because we think, oh, it's the lower, grosser part of us. But now we're learning that moral perfection does not consist in the slightest mortification of the body. Slightest word was added by me, but it comes in different forms, the mortification. In order to resolve this question, I will rely on elementary principles and will begin by demonstrating the need for caring for the body, which, according to the alternatives of health and infirmity, influences in a very important way the soul, which must be regarded as a prisoner in the flesh. So for us to fulfill our reincarnatory duty, we need a functional physical vessel. So it is our duty to take care of it, even if it came out not perfect right from the get-go. It's our moral duty to take care of our physical form, no matter what. And a certain modification might be drug abuse or eating junk food, too much sugar, and all those things, right? So, in order for this prisoner, namely the soul, to live, move about, and even conceive of the illusion of freedom, the body must be sound, of good disposition, and vigorous. So we're starting to get that body and soul need to work together. They're collaborators. They're divine collaborators for successful reincarnation or incarnation. So, what should we do to maintain the balance between their aptitudes and needs so different in nature? And he's talking about the aptitudes and needs of our souls as well as our bodies. Here, two systems confront each other, that of the ascetics, who want to bring down the body, and that of the materialists, who want to bring down the soul. So now he's telling us, as a form of answer to how can we create this balance, we have two extreme forms: the ascetics, who want to bring down the body, they don't want to pay attention to it, and the materialists who see nothing but the body. There's nothing else here. We have one chance, and that's this lifetime, and it's in this body, and boom, that's the end. So these are two forms of violence, our protector spirit says. Two forms of violence, each almost as foolish as the other. So let us keep that in mind. And this big problem would have remained entirely unsolved, these two extremes, this form of violence, if Spiritism had not come to assist those who study the issue by showing them the relationship between the body and the soul, and to tell them that since they are necessary for each other, body and soul are necessary for each other, both must be cared for. So we won't fall into either the trap of an ascetic or a materialist. Hopefully, we find ourselves in the middle, completely understanding how important it is to nourish our souls every day, because that's the nourishment that's for our eternity, and to nourish our bodies, which we need for this particular chunk of time that we're here on planet Earth, for our soul to actually progress. Interesting, right? Balance. So love your soul, but care also for your body, the soul's instrument. Being heedless of the needs that are indicated by nature itself means to be heedless of the law of God. So by not taking care of our bodies and souls equally, we are actually infringing upon God's laws. God's law. Do not punish your body for the wrongs that your free will has made it commit, and for which it is no more responsible than a badly ridden horse for any accident it might cause. How often do we get angry with our bodies, particularly maybe when we're sick or older, when all of a sudden things don't function 100% any longer, and then we cuss out our bodies? Is that the right response? No, we know better, right? We know that the body is just like a horse. The soul created potentially this problem by not taking care of the body. Our free will got us into trouble. It so often does, right? That's why Emmanuel says in Thought and Life, the will needs to be educated so that we have a chance to become more perfect. So we won't punish our bodies for anything that goes wrong. Will you be more perfect if you torture your body but remain no less selfish and proud? No, right? Our selfishness and pride most likely got our bodies down. No more charitable towards your neighbor. So we'll say that again. Will you be more perfect if you torture your body but remain no less selfish and proud? No more charitable towards your neighbor? It won't help, right? No, he says, perfection lies in the improvement of the spirit. Reminder again, this chapter is entitled Be Perfect. And all of this is part of us to learn to become more perfect. All the different nuances. Knowing farewell that we can't be as perfect as God, but we're aspiring towards God. Every single day, we're improving. Perfection lies entirely in the reforms to which you submit your spirit. So perfection lies in the improvement of the spirit. Yes. And then he finishes off by saying, when it comes to your lower tendency, reform them in the forge of your good resolutions. This is the way to make your soul responsive to the divine will. This is the one and only way to perfection. So what is he saying? What is George saying here? He's saying that we need to subdue our lower tendencies. And by subduing our lower tendencies, we reform, we perfect our spirit. And we do that through our good resolutions. For example, duty, fulfilling our moral duties. So we make our soul more responsive to the divine will as a result of improving our spirit and subduing our lower sentiments while taking care of our bodies as well. This is the one and only way to perfection. We need to work on our lower sentiments, on our passions. Passions are not bad per se, the spirits told us. They're just like wild horses if they haven't been trained, if they haven't been controlled and educated. So, dear friends, this completes our study. I hope we know a little bit more of how to be more perfect. So that the main highlights are, of course, as in the summary of all summaries, charity, to love our enemies. So how can we become more perfect? So we're going to summarize in just a couple of sentences. We love our enemies more. We do more good to those who do not like us. We pray for those who persecute us. We are, in short, becoming more and more charitable. Then we will fulfill our moral duties. Our moral duty means that we fulfill the good on all levels. Then we become more compassionate. The virtues that we focus on are particularly humility, because humility is the antidote to pride and selfishness. Then, when we are out in the world, which we are invited to be, we are invited to take care of our subordinates well, because it's a gift or a trial that we are in this position. And at the end of the day, we need to render an accounting, both being a subordinate or a superior are equally important positions. And both as superiors as well as subordinates, we're invited to do our very best. The subordinate serves the superior well because the subordinate too has to render an accounting. So respect on all levels is very important. Then we're invited to live in the world, not to seclude ourselves, to be happy and cheerful. But while we do that, we can stay connected to God through a prayerful attitude, because God is love and he blesses all those who love virtuously. When we fulfill our duty, we're always focusing on expanding love. And lastly, we need to take care of our body and spirit equally, because the body is vital for us to fulfill our duties, to fulfill our reincarnatory plan in this lifetime. So, dear friends, I think we know a little bit more, don't we? Let me say hello and goodbye to everyone. Hi, Tony, Mark, and Teresa. Thank you so much for joining, dear friends. Many blessings, and let us become more perfect. Have a beautiful week. Take care.